Now you know why we do it with a live audience. Isn't the clapping kind of fun?
They're great.
Makes me feel better.
I know. That's why I do this. It's for the clapping. Right before we went to the break, we talked about the indictment and the accusations of corruption, and then the guilt, and then the flipping it of the DOJ, all of that, and that Alaska's just seemed to sort of move on. And there's a question from our audience. Do you think that Senator Stevens was more insulated in his later years, maybe trusting the wrong people? And Jack, you spent some time with him. What do you think of that?
Well, I didn't spend a lot of time with him at the latter part of his career. We kept in touch, but no, I don't know if he was more insulated. I think it raises a question of Bill Allen, and you know, I have my theory on that. Both of them were at the top of their game. Both were for Alaska, development of Alaska. I mean, that's what Ted was all about. But it's no excuse. He shouldn't have gotten that close to Bill Allen. He should have known that Allen was way over bounds, way out of line as far as influencing legislation in the state. I don't think Ted didn't change his vote in Congress because of Bill Allen, is my guess. But Michael probably knows more than I do about this Bill Allen stuff.
You go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that serving some 14 years in the legislature, you see how power can affect people. And you've heard the saying, absolute power. And Ted had a lot of it. And sometimes I think you soften just your basic self over knowing someone very well, and friendships perhaps take on too much validity. But I don't know, so many people you talk to, and certainly mine, they were kind of issue specific with Ted, and so you didn't get this sense of possible too much influence by certain people. And there are people whose motives are not good, and I think Bill Allen was one of them, let's face it. And I think that affected Ted, because they were good friends, sadly.
Michael, do you see that as well?
This is probably a complicated question. Either that or it's very simple. I'm not quite sure. I do know that at different times I'd written stuff like, oh, you didn't need to smell the sulfur to, when Bill Allen was in the room, to know what kind of work he was in. And this just made Ted mad, and he talked about how he'd lost so many friends, and Bill Allen had been a friend to him, and so many people had died, and Bill Allen was good to him. But I suppose that the most charitable way you could look at it was that these were people who developed a trusting relationship and friendly. But Bill Allen on the witness stand and other places made it quite clear that politics was business to him. It was to advance his interests. And there are many other people who were that way, many other people in the business community, many private citizens who didn't represent a business, just themselves, who felt the same way about politics. But I think my co-panelists would agree, Allen just didn't accept limits. And I think Ted is to be faulted for not recognizing that. I mean, Allen was got in all kinds of trouble in 1986 with the Public Offices Commission for the kind of illegal campaign contributions he made, and he kept on doing it. And I think it's fair to say, respectful of the dead, Ted Stevens didn't know about that because he didn't want to know about it.
All right. Ted Stevens was the king of pork, the antithesis of the GOP now. Don't these Tea Partiers know Alaska would be a much different place without all those federal dollars? Yeah, we'd have trails still.
You know, we came into the game very late as a state, and we talk about pork, but I look at fuel tanks. I look at basic ability to have a landing strip. I look at health clinics. I look at nurses or teachers' housing in rural Alaska. And I have trouble saying P-O-R-K. I see basic needs of Alaskans and communities. So, anyhow, I guess I don't see that as pork.
Well, I think that's true. We did come in late in the game. We're a 51-year-old state. And I mean, it was expensive. Everything was expensive to get here and build from nothing up. Jack, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think he spent his whole career trying to educate people in Congress, you know, bring them up here every summer to show these guys what the bush looked like and what the bush needed, particularly the bush. That's his role.
Well, he convinced them.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I mean, they came here and they're like, "You do what in a bucket? No, we'll get you." You know, or you don't. Or if they tried to land on a sandbar somewhere, he's like, "Yeah, this is what it's like if we don't have a runway," and they'd be like, "Okay, we're gonna get."
And then I don't know this firsthand, but I think it's true. Inouye from Hawaii, senator, a little advance of Ted, was a Democrat, and Ted is a Republican, and they agreed for their two states that one or the other would be on the Appropriations Committee, and the other would be on the Commerce Committee. And they just do this throughout their whole career. So talk about pork, you're on the Appropriations Committee, of course, he was chairman for a number of years, so.
It's amazing we don't have a bridge to Hawaii. Now that would have been some pork I could believe in.
So could
I would have made the General Contractors Association very happy.
Very happy.
I'm sure. Can you imagine Ted Stevens on Twitter? Did he ever use the series of tubes? I don't know. Did he ever email anybody?
This is a good story. I mean, I know he emailed people because he emailed me. And sometimes it was to tell me I was doing things right, and sometimes it was to tell me I was doing things wrong. And probably in the last year, I mean, we would sort of go through this relationships where things were good, and then something wouldn't work out between us, usually because of something I wrote in the newspaper or the Anchorage Daily News did. But there were times when he would email me mistakes, things he meant to send to lobbyists. This was only in the last year. And, or business colleagues. And I just felt sort of honor bound to write him back and say, you need to get your distribution list straightened out. I'm going to pretend I didn't see this.
And this was just in the last year?
Yeah, I mean, it was when he was apparently trying to, he's getting into some business relationships and developing, sort of he would use whatever influence he had to help somebody out. I mean, he wasn't the appropriations chairman anymore. So I would get these by mistake, and I'd be reading this. Who's Bob? Why? Oh, and then I'd say, okay, Ted pressed the wrong button, so I just pretend I didn't see it.
So he did use
No, but he was very, I remember seeing him sitting in the office. He liked that stuff.
Yeah,
he was very
it.
familiar with technology.
Did Ted Stevens ever have private security goons?
Private security what?
Goons. Do you ever have people walking around and protecting him? They would have had to walk fast, wouldn't they?
Well, chairman of the Appropriations Committee, or no?
When he was president pro tem, didn't they force some kind of?
Had two guys, two people, one woman and a man up here, I remember. Yeah, they.
But that was Secret Service, not private security.
I don't know anything about the other, no.
Yeah.
I never saw it.
And we'd have to discuss the definition of goon.
Yeah.
Or description of. I'm sure these people were very well tailored.
I'm sure. Ted Stevens said that when he was appointed to the U.S. Senate, he fully expected it to be temporary. Isn't that something? Well, I guess everything's temporary, but it's certainly not to this.
I don't think he thought it was temporary. He told me, I'll be in there 20 years. Right off the bat.
Yeah, he was a little misjudged.
Yeah, well,
there you go.
40, but he said, no, I'll be in there 20 years.
Another thing that's interesting, he ran twice and lost twice in the 60s. Mm-hmm. He ran in 1962 against Ernest Greening, and he ran against him again. And it's more than ironic. That word's used almost wrongly all the time, but I mean, it's quite humorous to go back and read him in 1967 saying, "We need a change. Ernest Greening is too old. He served too long." I mean, he says it just like that. And he talks about him being out of touch, that he spent too much time in Washington. I mean, it was fill in the blank, of whose other name could fit in there.
Right, and Ernest Greening, so many people have forgotten things about him or didn't catch up about him. He's the reason that we have 911 in this country. Across the country, you dial 911, you're connected to, emergency crews. That was him. He did tremendous things.
Well, Ernest was very. He was like Ted in one respect, and that was he was very interested in bringing money back to Alaska and go see President Johnson or whoever it was and tell him why Alaska needed special understanding.
I think Alaska has been pretty darn lucky in the people that have represented the state. We've had some wonderful people. I loved working with Jay Hammond. I have no idea what Ted and Jay's relationship was, but I hope they enjoyed each other, because I enjoyed each one of them separately. Do you know? Did they get along?
Jack, do you know? Did they get along?
I don't know. They might have hated each other.
No. I don't think they hated. They were quite different. I mean, Ted was resource development, right? Jay was, whoa, slow down.
Conservation.
Slow down.
Yeah.
Well, and Jay, I loved him dearly, but he had something that Ted would never say. He would say, "I'm not a politician."
Oh, yeah.
Or "I'm not a professional politician."
Yeah.
The number of times you could hear Jay Hammond say that and maintain a straight face.
Well, but he was a different kind too. I mean, he was flying himself around to villages and driving people
but they'd both
crazy.
been in the military in World War II. They both came up here after the military. They both were pilots. They did have some things in common, but I think Jack would agree. Their personalities were just so different.
But they loved this place, both.
See,
of them.
and that really is what it has to boil back down to, is that, do you agree on everything? You're not going to. Are there going to be things that happen in Washington that just make you crazy? Yes, but I think there are a lot of different kind of people that really love this state, and as long as that's the priority, then like you had, years and years of friendship with someone that you didn't agree with on politics, and that just was
how it was.
That's just how it was, and hopefully we'll get back to those days a little bit more. One quick question: isn't it a little sickening to hear so many tales about how Ted Stevens got money for somebody? Oh, you know what? It meant something to them. Everybody can pick something to cut and it'd be someone else's, but for them, it was important. I heard about him getting cattle back into Alaska when Canada had put a ban because they had mad cow disease and they wouldn't let any cattle be transported through. And a couple ranchers in Homer flew down there, and before they got back here, they were bringing cattle across the border, and it was ready, it was done. So everybody had a little piece of something that they seemed to
I
want.
don't know. I remember the native land claims. I remember so many of the big issues that Ted was a part of, and those are the things I remember.
And I think it's important to remember that Ted had such a long career in public office.
That's
there
true.
are few to, there are times, look, I was an editorial writer. There are editorials that I know if I could take them back, I would do it. Even recent things I've written from time to time. Ted Stevens made mistakes. He never claimed to be perfect. There were people he trusted and he shouldn't. He got on the wrong side of issues. From a broad, I think, public policy position that people would agree with. He disagreed with Jay Hammond and a whole lot of other people, and he and Ernest Greening couldn't stand each other most of the time.
But that's
this is part of, if there was anybody out there who got it all right, we haven't met him yet.
That's right. Well,
him or her, I might add.
Or her. Thank you so much for being here, Jack and Arliss and Michael, for sharing this. We'll be back next week with more Up North.